Okay, so in the last video, we looked at the old version of the Quest menu GUI, and we talked about how it's set up, how it works, how the client makes use of the components, and how everything gets rendered in-game. Um, this time we're going to talk about the new components, and we're going to manually update the code so that we can support the newer version of the Quest menu GUI. The first thing for this is to start, we're going to start with the load function. So we need to update this function so that we're gaining access to all of the new components. So first of all, what we'll do is we'll get rid of the code for all of the old components except for two. One of the things you'll notice is that we still have the text title, which is where what the NPC is saying gets stored, and we still have the text menu, which is where the text for the option the player can choose gets stored. So we'll keep those. But there's a couple that we need to add. So one of those is the button for closing the GUI. So what we'll do real quick is we'll grab that pointer. Okay, so that was button close. Okay, and now we have access to this close button. Okay, so the next one we need is the string for the NPC name. So we'll grab that. Let's see in 3 UI string pointer. And that is the text NPC name. One of the things I should mention is that I've already updated the header file with all of the components that we'll be making use of. So for this, I'm going to focus mostly on the logic side of things. But this is relatively self-explanatory and should be pretty obvious as we start using these objects, which pieces of this we'll actually need. But just as a quick summary, so these are the components that I added that were part of the new GUI. These components here are the images and the button for each of the options that the player can choose from. And this stuff up here is the same as it was before, so none of this is actually changing. And all of the methods are the same and all that stuff. So that's the only difference that's been made. Okay. So next we need the actual button. Let's see, let's grab the scroll bar first. And to get the basic functionality working, we won't need to make use of the scroll bar, but we'll grab it here anyway. Okay. We have the text title and the text menu, so we'll grab the button next. So this is the actual button for the option which the player chooses. Okay. Next, we need some images. So as you can see here, we have the button image. This isn't actually the images for the button because they're stored here. So the button is like a group, and it has images like the normal image for the button when you click it down, when you're hovering over the button, and when the button is disabled. Um, so all of those images they're taken care of automatically for us, so we don't have to worry about those. But for the image that gets displayed behind the button, the image at the bottom, and the image behind the button image, we'll need those three images. So let's grab those. That was menu. That's the bottom image. And then the menu image. Okay. Now, for the options, the way we're doing it this time, or previously, we were stretching the images behind the options so that we didn't have to create extra images and end up rendering more sort of the texture. We could just stretch the textures we have, and it looked fine because the textures were very simple. They were just the sides of an image. This time around, however, we will, since we're dealing with buttons, we need to create a button for each option. We also need to create images behind each of those buttons so it all looks consistent. And the way that we're going to do that is that for each option, we're going to copy um, the objects that are given to us by the UIF file and copy those components for each of the options. And we only need to do that for the components that make up a single option. Now, one of the things that I should note is the way that these processes work is there's the parent-child hierarchy. So for instance, when this base gets rendered, which is all of the GUI components, when that gets rendered, it goes through and renders each of these components one by one. And then for any of these that go further, it'll check and see which of these images should be rendered. Because we're copying each of the components for the option, we don't want to have the we don't need to render the objects that given for a particular option because we're going to be creating the options we want to render later. It's kind of confusing, but hopefully it'll make more sense later. But what I'm going to do is that I'm actually going to remove some components from this child-parent hierarchy. So, and the reason why I'm doing this is because there are some components that I don't want rendered every time, and I don't want them check. I don't want the code to check to see if they've been clicked on and whatnot, because they aren't. Let's see. Um, okay. Um, Let me add this. Okay, fix that. Yeah, so as I was saying, sorry, these components are being used for a particular option for this GUI. So there's the text sample, so this is where the actual text that the player reads that gets rendered. This is the button to click on, and this is the image button that gets put behind the image. Whether this is actually necessary, you could argue, but they put it there anyway. And then there's the image behind that, um, which is actually this base image here. Okay, so this gives us all the things that are in this UIF file, but it excludes the components that are making up one option because we removed them. Okay, but doing it this way, we no longer have to use the resized children, so we don't have to add the components to that. Because of that, we can get rid of some of these other options. So previously I had mentioned there was some code that was a bit redundant. So doing it this way actually gets rid of some of that redundant code. Okay. Okay, so now we just need to rework the part that when the player right clicks on it, we'll have to make use of these new components that we just read in from the file. So the first thing we'll want to do is change the init base. And I'm just going to copy this code. So what this is doing is it's setting the position back to 0, 0. And the reason why the position gets set back every time is because everything's being resized. The where you position it in the Y direction has to change in order to center this GUI, because as more options get added, the length of it changes, it becomes longer. So when we initialize this, we set it back to 0, 0 so that we can center it correctly later. We set the menu count to 0, and then these are the components that make up a single option for the player to choose on. So and so what we're doing is if any of them exist, then we're just deleting the memory used with them and setting to null. And let's see, I should also change the constructor and destructor. So this is just whenever the object gets created, it's basically just setting all those options to all those properties to null. And for the destructor, all we have to do is make sure that we destroy the components that we removed from the parent-child. So when a parent gets deleted, all of its children get deleted. But since we have removed some of those down here, then we're going to have to manually delete them in the destructor. So we do that. Now we updated the base. We have the load. So now we're ready to rewrite the open method. Okay, so as before, there's the check that these components exist, but these components have changed now. So we replace that code checking to make sure the new components are there. The code for getting the packet information is the same. However, we need to grab the MPC information so that we can set the string for which MPC this is coming from. So this part up here, text MPC name, should be set to the name of the MPC. Since the pack information gives us the MPC ID, we can use this code here to get the actual MPC. What I need to do here is add some header files here. So I'm adding the button header file and the other player manager. So what that class does is it manages all the other player entities, which could include other players on the server, or for instance here, like this NPC. So we can use the NPC ID, and this class has a method NPC getById, which gets us the NPC. If it's null, we just return because that NPC doesn't exist. If it's not null, then we set the string NPC name to the NPC ID string, which is the actual name of the NPC. Excuse me. Okay. Hopefully it's not too confusing. If so, feel free to ask. This part here is all the same, so we're using that index to get the actual string that that gets displayed in this part here. This is what the NPC is actually saying to the player. The next bit of code, we're getting all the options from that packet from the server, so we can get those there. This changes because we no longer need to resize these components because we're not resizing the images, we're manually recreating those images. So we can get rid of that code. Since we're making use of the parent-child hierarchy the way it's supposed to be used, we no longer need this array where we're manually adding all the children. This is redundant, as I mentioned in the first part. Next, all we need now is just the height of the image that's behind the button. So what this code does is it gets the height of this image here, because you can use this image to separate the menu options, solely this image, using the height of this here. Then you can imagine taking this bottom image, sliding it down, copying, pasting this part, so that now you have two options. You can do it a third, fourth, fifth time, and just keep doing it. You can add it like that. Okay. Another thing that we're changing is we're not making use of the objects that have already been created. Um, so we don't need that. Also, we'll be creating new buttons and stuff. So let me grab this. So this is the new code. And let me just explain what happens here. You can see that the for loop is starting at 0 and going through the total number of possible menu options. And for each of these, it's creating a string as it was before, setting the string option, it's copying the object into the newly created object, setting the string, and it's moving the string based on that this image here, as we discussed earlier. Another thing that you have to do is add the image for the button, the background button, and the button itself. So you add these three, create them, copy them from what you got originally from the UIF file, move them, and you set their parent to the UIQuestMenu object, so the object that we're in. Okay, so what that is doing is basically creating everything that we need to make a new option and then moving it down to where it's supposed to be located. So it keeps doing that. So it's like copy and paste. Okay, and then what's nice is we no longer need any of this code, so we can get rid of all that. To move the bottom image, we can just get the last, we can get the region, the rectangle for the very last option. Then we get the bottom of that, and we can set the position for this bottom image, which is this image here. We can set the Y position to the bottom of the last option we created. And what this does is it sets it right where it needs to be, down here at the bottom. Okay. So that simplifies that code. And this piece here, right, so the new bottom of kind of the parent, the whole thing needs to change. So it's that you basically want it to be the bottom of the bottom image. So this bottom image has a bottom here, and you want the bottom of this entire GUI component to match with the bottom image here. So that's what this code is doing. It's the same code as before, except now that we have this bottom image, we're just making use of it. And then what we want to do is set it to the center of the screen, which is what's being done here. So this doesn't change at all. Okay, so that is everything. It's actually a lot less code. It's not redundant, so it's not having to write custom render methods and using the resize children array. It can use the built-in parent-child system so that it can render all the children. Okay, so what we want to do is change the GUI to the new GUI and the TBLs, and then we can compile the new code, see if we get any errors or anything like that. Okay, let's log in and let's see our new user interface. There we go. So everything updated correctly. Everything seems to be working now. So you can click on these. It's all great. And we get the NPC ID here at the top. We have the text that the NPC is saying to us. We have all the options as we did before. We can click on them and whatnot. So there you go. So hold on, let's see if okay. All right, thanks. Till next time.